Hello class, I'm going to be talking about the Garden of Forking Paths and General Song in my presentation today. These are the main characters in the story. Dr. Yu Xian is the main character. The story follows him around, and Stephen Albert is this character that's used in a special way to get a message relayed. A concept I'm going to be discussing is magical realism versus science fiction. The definitions are listed for each of those terms, and I do not feel that either of them really are reflected in the Garden of Forking Paths. There's no magic in the story, and all characters are human with no real magical abilities, which means that magical realism is out. And there's also no technological change that takes place that kind of shifts the story. The story ends with a shooting and it somehow gets a message relayed, but there's not really a technological change that causes that. Another concept is forking paths and the labyrinth. The labyrinth is different than a maze. It's a winding path with no dead ends. And many times throughout the story, Albert and Xian talk about the labyrinth that was created by his ancestor. They talk about infinite time and universes. Sui believed in forking in time, which was represented in his labyrinth that he created. Albert and Xian are discussing at one point in the story their decisions they had made up to this point. They are talking about the outcomes of their decisions, and then they talk about how in different universes they made other decisions which led to completely different situations. Some universes they weren't even together at this moment. There were multiple times in the story where Sun kind of felt that he was already dead, or he kind of felt that Richard Madden had some way penetrated his desperate plan already. And because Xian has had these previous thoughts of the labyrinth and the previous quotes that I just mentioned, I believe that he kind of thinks that he does exist in other universes, and he's kind of relating himself in those situations. Now, for the important moment of the story, exactly how did he do it? Yu Xian looked through the phone book and found a man by the name of Stephen Albert. This name is very important. He ended up killing this man, and it made the newspaper and made it all the way up to the chief of the German army during the World War, Albert, who was murdered by a stranger, one Yu Xian. Yu Xian kind of believes that he communicated to Berlin the secret name of the city they must attack, and it turns out that Berlin did indeed attack Albert right after Yu Xian's story kind of made the spotlight, and later on Yu Xian found out that his actions were indeed very useful. Now I'm going to be talking about General Song, and the main character in this is really the only character. It's the narrator, which is technically Pablo Neruda's voice that's kind of speaking through it. One concept I'm going to talk about is art. The story gives nature personification quite a lot. An example is quoted below. There's also a moment where it talks about a sundial, and in this it forms the shape of a large virtual-like bird, which is a messenger of humanity, and when the sun shines through it. Another concept is city and civilization. This poem talks about how all paths lead to the same goal, but you must go through solitude and isolation in order to reach the enchanted place. The quote talks about the atrocious maze and lost jungles that you have to go through in order to reach Machu Picchu. This whole poem also takes place during the Spanish Civil War, and it's a lot of Neruda's political opinions mixed together throughout this piece as well. The important moment is when Neruda calls out, "Rise up to be born with me, my brother," and he's talking to the ordinary people. He's talking about the struggle for social justice, referring to the laborer, the weaver, just the ordinary people. He's upset about the new government, and he's kind of describing kind of almost a rebellion or revolt of the people getting out of the bottom of the rocks. And these are my sources. Good luck on your test, class.